Hello, everybody. What was that show? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You all do, I can tell. That's why you came. Who doesn't want to be a millionaire? So, if it was easy to be a zero-waste millionaire, it would be happening. If the market was set up in a way that it rewarded zero waste, I wouldn't be traveling around speaking about the changes society has to go through, double bottom line stuff. The market would just be taken care, okay? So that we've really got to be honest and tell ourselves, the way the market is set up right now, we're not going to have zero waste millionaires. Something has to change. It was interesting, I mentioned this morning, and I'll say it again here, 30 years ago, recycling started off as a completely non-profit activity. I was there, and it was like, wasn't single bottom line, it was negative bottom line. Then after, 1987, the New York Mobro garbage barge, it was kind of like an iconic event. All of a sudden, Dan Rather was on the news every night, watching this barge of garbage out of New York float around the eastern seaboard. It headed down to the Caribbean. No one would let it dock for almost a year. And what the press did with this fun little story was they created a landfill shortage crisis in America. Well, the early recyclers, it was never about landfill capacity. We were always about resource conservation. So when the media hijacked the whole story and said, we're running out of landfills in America, and here's proof. Look at this garbage barge floating around the world. We lost control of the narrative. And all of a sudden, governments intervened and started looking at their landfills. And big landfill companies got bigger. And small city solid waste divisions got bigger. And all of a sudden, it became this giant industry to figure out where our waste was going to go with this shrinking landfill base. It was almost like the excuse for a takeover. At the time, there was probably 1,000 mission-driven recyclers in the US. Within 10 years, there was less than 100. My peers, we got decimated by this 1987 to 1997 move into recycling as a single bottom line activity. All of a sudden, everybody was after the paper profits, the metal profits. There were no plastic profits and there were no glass profits back then. But there was metal and there was paper. So the single bottom line transition did as much damage as it did good for the larger resource conservation dialogue. And that's where I and my other pioneers in this whole thing, that's where we were coming from. Well, we reclaimed it when we created the Zero Waste Movement in 1996. I was on the National Recycling Coalition board at the time. The early 90s was a very exciting time to be there, but in 1995, we had a vote on the NRC's board, and the board voted down the idea of going to Washington and having President Clinton do what California had recently done, which was to put a minimum content standard on newspapers. If you had a newspaper of 50,000 or more circulation, you had to put in like 50% fiber content recycled. Why was this necessary? Because the country had gone nuts in mandating collection and had done nothing for market development. And it was decimating the recycling industry. And the NRC board voted it down. And it's like, what are we here for, if not to promote recycling? So about a dozen of us left, and we created the Grassroots Recycling Network, GRRN. And we established it as a pure advocacy organization for zero waste. And we brought back the resource conservation narrative. We brought back the triple bottom line. We brought back the whole story around subsidies, around jobs creation. And Ted Turner funded us for 4 years, gave us $500,000. We spent in about 5 years, and that was the birth of the Zero Waste Movement from '96 to 2000. So I'm continuing that story. I really believe there are zero waste millionaires waiting to be had out there because the waste industry is huge. It's a $60 billion industry in the US, $250 billion in the world. Most of that money is still going to landfills and incinerators, huge amount of it. So, but we're not going to get there. My zero waste millionaires are not going to get there as single bottom line entrepreneurs. So I'm just telling you right up front that I have a whole different idea. And I happen to think that social enterprise is one of the most exciting things that's been happening on the planet in the last 10 years. It didn't start here, it started in the UK, 1998, 99. They hit the wall that we hit in 2008. And Tony Blair, who was running England at the time, basically knew that he had on his hands a problem he didn't quite know how to handle. So he created what he thought was a new way of doing business in the United Kingdom. And he created a cabinet seat for social enterprise, and he called it the third sector. And I'm going to talk about that because it's been growing and growing over in the UK, and it's starting to take hold in the US, and it's starting to take hold in a lot of places. Because what it says is that we can do business, and we can create jobs, and we can take care of the environment, and we can do a lot of things, but it's going to take an intelligence and a coordination that we haven't ever seen before. All right, I showed that this morning. If anybody didn't catch who I was or EcoCycle was, I won't go over that again, but I do want to stress again, we are all about education and we are all about operations. I've been building facilities, I've been doing collections, I've been doing politics, I've been in the trenches for almost 30 years now, and that's where, you know, this is coming from. I showed you the megatrends this morning. Once again, we're all operating within a context in the world, and there are connections to all of this. That top line, a new approach is needed to address the major social and environmental problems of our times. That's what Tony Blair came up with. That's what hit him in the late 90s. A new approach is needed because the social and environmental problems of the UK keep getting worse and worse and worse. That quote by the CEO of the Royal Bank of Scotland, I was in the room when he made that at the first International Social Enterprise Forum conference. The government can't do it, the market won't do it, and charity is a Band-Aid. The CEO of that bank understood that the new businesses that he wanted to lend money to were going to be social enterprises. I thought I was listening to Karl Marx the way this guy was talking. It was stunning. But he was smart. He knew that single bottom line businesses were dying in the UK, but social enterprises were rising. And so he was going to bankroll them. I should mention at this conference, there was 450 people, 8 Americans, 2 American speakers. I was one of 2. And the reason being is because EcoCycle is one of the largest social enterprises in the US. You may have heard a lot of talk lately. Bill Gates and a lot of Ted Turner, a lot of prominent people have been saying, you know what? We have to do something about capitalism. It's not satisfying us. There's all kinds of labels getting thrown on it. The last one is interesting. It's a book called Capitalism 2.0. Fascinating read. But this is a big discussion. This is going on right now. And this is really interesting to jump into, but it's bigger than what we need to talk about. I think we can bring it down and just call it social enterprise. Because those 2 words encapture what we're after here. And that's the definition by the Social Enterprise Alliance. We do have a National Trade Association. It's 10, 12 years old now. But the point there is that we achieve our primary social and environmental mission using business methods. Because business methods are good. Business methods are efficient. Business methods make sense. And so EcoCycle's been doing for 20 some odd years now our contracts, and we're very transparent with everyone we make contracts with, and we say we do business on a cost plus 10% basis. Our books are going to be open to you, but we need a 10% profit to be stable and grow. And I've never had anyone tell me 10% is too much. They've always said, you know what, if you give me good service, I'll gladly give you a 10% margin. Okay? That's an important thought here. As I said, it's global. I looked up recently, and it looks like 62,000 now are registered in the UK, 5% of all businesses with employees, 16 billion. And this is the strictest definition they have. Those 62,000, 75% of their income is coming from traded goods and services. That's a fairly high bar, because there's actually a lot of social enterprises out there that are getting 50% of their income from business practices and 50% from traditional philanthropy and other ways they do business, because you can be nonprofit or for-profit to be a social enterprise. But what's really amazing is Scotland has a target of 20% of their GMP in the social enterprise sector. We're talking about a major new section of the economy, and it's working, especially in the waste industry. If you want to Google social enterprise recycling in Scotland, you'll be astounded at the number of firms and the creativity of their activities over there. What's key for all of us, them and America, is we need to come up with a legal framework for this new approach of doing business, because we don't want somebody just saying I'm a social enterprise and BSing us all and getting tax breaks and all that other stuff. So it's been a 12-year hunt. The CICs, KICs, Bs, and L3Cs, the KIC, Community Interest Company, was created in England. It's a legal entity. It has certain requirements to fulfill their mission first, and the state can actually intervene on them if they don't do their social mission. In exchange for that, they're given preferential points in RFPs. They're given preferential positioning for public tax dollars. And I think that's exactly, you heard me this morning say we should be spending our public dollars to buy the future we want. We should be spending those money on social enterprises in partnership. The second one is the B Corp. You may have heard of it. It's the American creation response to the KIC. And there's a difference between corporations and company, by the way. You need to realize corporations by law have to maximize stockholder profits. The B Corp has in their charter, we don't have to maximize profits for our stockholders. And that's the big difference in a B Corp. They say explicitly, we don't have to do that. We're here to do a mission and make some money. So the B Corp, if you want to start a B Corp, you have to register it and you have to get certified by a company who then will come back every 24 months and recertify you. So it's a process that you have to get involved with. I think it's interesting. I think we're all watching it to see where it's going to go. But the one that I like is called the L3C, the Low Profit Limited Liability Company. Now, without going into too much depth, the LLC was a creation in America it's really fascinating. It says that if any 5 of us want to start a business together, each of us will become a member. And each of our member benefits and buy-in can be different. And that's the key. So I can buy in for 10 bucks and get 50% of the return because it was my idea. I'm the inventor. Someone else can buy in and they have to pay 5 times what I did and get half of the benefit that I get. That's okay. That's what LLCs are all about, is bringing in members at different investment ratios. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then finally, the thing I find fascinating in Italy is they're developing this thing called the in-house company. And it's a little bit like, you know, my brother Vinny, come on in. So you got to be careful of that. But when it works, it really works. San Francisco has an in-house company and nobody knows it. It's the leading zero waste community in the US. They keep this quiet and I'm always scolding them for it. Recology, which is the private sector trash company that has all of San Francisco, was written into the city charter 70 years ago. All the guys who run Ecology, their names end in a vowel. I can say that because mine does too. It wasn't a real clean deal 70 years ago. Who gets written into the city charter? They can't be fired. It was as cozy as you can imagine. Well, to their credit, they've evolved. And now the city staff and Recology negotiate how they're going to get San Francisco to zero waste. I have no idea if Recology limits their return to 10% or not. They haven't shown me the number. But 10% of a big number is a big number, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's somewhere around 10%. And what's really interesting, I'll tell you this after this a little bit more, it's not that unusual to have a private company have a public monopoly and get paid 10%. It's It's how our electric systems run. So it's not that unusual, but in this case, an in-house company working hand in hand with city staff, they're doing fantastic things because they just negotiate everything. Some of you city staff are looking at that. Just imagine if you had the private sector with all their trucks and all their efficiencies at your bidding, and all you had to do was meet a price. And if it was too high, you leaned on them to justify it. And you brought in other private sector people to look at it and see if it was fair. That's how they do it. That's how I did it in Boulder County. 10 years ago, we built a public MRF. I had built the first private MRF as a nonprofit. We ran it for, whatever, 25 years. But we outgrew it. And so basically the public did a 7-year tax, and they built a beautiful new MRF. I handed over my book of business. I had all the accounts. I had all the tons. And in exchange, we negotiated a contract. I call it a social enterprise contract, but it's almost like the electric utility public monopoly contract. I limited my risk because they wouldn't give me complete say over the project. So I couldn't limit my risk. So I said, okay, so if you're not going to let me run the project the way I want to, you've got to guarantee me, cost plus 10%. So they went around the country with a consultant and found out that that's, for this sort of contract, that's right in the middle. Some people get like 6 and some people get 14%, but if we get good service, 10% is fair. So what's really nice about that is point 3 down there, the county gets the revenues. In good market times, like we've had the last 10 years, my profit getting capped somewhere around 9%, we've put $5 million back in the Boulder County Recycling Fund. County commissioners are blown away. Everybody is. They're like, wow, this is really good. And it's really good because that money's going back into the community program. It's an enterprise fund. It can't be used for general fund. It has to go back into recycling. So every penny in Boulder County is being utilized to grow recycling. All right, let's get back real quickly because L3Cs are real and getting more real. 10 states have now allowed them to be created in their states. So it's a limited profit LLC, not much different there. It must serve its mission first before making its profit. The legal membership thing, like I said, allows different. But number 4 is the key. The foundation PRI, program-related investment. It's a key reason the L3C was created. So what's a PRI? According to the laws of America, and by the way, the U.S. is good at a lot of things, particularly philanthropy. We have got foundations that now sit on between $600 and $700 billion. And by law, they have to spend at least 5% of that money every year, according to our tax laws. So that's at least $30 billion a year that the foundations have to spend to stay legal, okay? The PRI was created 20 years ago. And what it said was, you don't necessarily have to give the money out as grants. You can give it as a loan or even as an investment to a for-profit company if it supports the mission of your foundation. But the IRS stepped in and said, okay, we are going to watch that like a hawk. And it turns out that you have to get what's called a letter ruling from the IRS to approve it. That takes over a year to 18 months to get, costs between $10,000 and $15,000 to get. And even after you get that, there's no guarantee the IRS isn't going to come back 5 years later and say, that doesn't support your mission. You should not have given them that $1 million loan. We're now going to fine you, and the fines are big. So basically, they made it so hard that for the last 20 years, PRIs have accounted for about 1% of foundation giving because it's just too darn scary. So the L3C was created with the idea by this Robert Lang guy. He was the head of a foundation who was frustrated at this. He recruited the IRS head of the foundation tax department. And he said, you come over here and work with me, and let's create a way to open up the gates on this PRI funding, make it easier for foundations. So that was the birth of this whole idea. So 10 states you can now incorporate. Over 100 L3Cs now exist, and foundations mostly call it impact investments, and this impact investment idea is growing in leaps and bounds the last 5 years. In 2009, the Bill Gates Foundation started an investment fund of $400 million because they were saying, look, we want to invest and have some control over some of these projects we're putting all this big money into. So they can sit on the board. They're loaning lots of money to these social enterprises. It was so successful, they just bumped it up to $1 billion. You're seeing it everywhere. Impact investing, it's a bunch of different names now. But again, this is one of those cutting edge issues. It's happening right now all around us, and there's a lot of money being thrown out. Unfortunately, the IRS is dragging its feet. Well, I'll tell you this first. Okay, so this is the other foundations that are getting on board. 2% of their endowments. Skoll Foundation, there's a couple of websites for you to do your own research on this, especially that last one, PRI Makers. That's a very interesting resource for people that are part of this world. But anyway, let me just tell you really quickly, the IRS is dragging its feet, and it's a real problem. They don't know quite how to define mission. They don't know how to measure mission, basically. So they're a little bit stuck in how to decide if a foundation gave me money to build a compost facility or to do something good. How are they going to watch and measure what's happening here so we don't get scammed? So I'm glad they're going slow, because I believe in the idea enough that I don't want the scammers to come in. I want only the legitimate people who are doing social enterprise to get through the gates. So that's still an ongoing issue. I want to give you an example of how I think this can be used in my town. Ogden needs a composting facility. Everybody needs composting facilities. That's a problem. This composting thing got the horse ahead of the cart, or I'm sorry, the cart ahead of the horse. So $6 million composting facility, nothing too fancy. And I'm moving forward on this myself. So the first investment might be a PRI, $3 million with a 1% return, because I can find an environmental foundation that would believe in the zero waste mission. The second money is slow money. There are a lot of rich people out there that will gladly take 5% return right now. Wouldn't you? How do you feel about Wall Street? I mean, really. So there's a lot of money out there looking for a 5% return. And then finally, you can go out there for the last 25% and find, the people who want a higher market type return, 8%. So they're called tranches. That's called a tranche, multi-tranche investment plan. So that's how the LLC would build a plan around this. I think the key, though, is that social enterprise needs to partner with the local government. Why? Because local government in this project holds the key to supply and demand. Let's remember, in the waste industry, the zero waste economy, there's this thing called QQR, quantity, quality, and reliability. You cannot build a zero waste business if you can't satisfy QQR. The public sector has the power to create the quantity and the reliability, not the quality. Quality is still something that's subjective. But cities can create the quantity of discards and the reliability of those discards. I was talking to somebody here about glass companies, compost company not wanting to come to the Salt Lake area because they weren't going to be given enough quantity on a reliable basis to justify their investment. Who's going to come in and spend their own $6 million if there's no tons to process? So I really think the partnership here is critical. The public sector creates the quantity and the reliability, and then let the private sector create the quality and the business plan. And I've already mentioned this. Is this radical? Not at all. Most people just have not looked at things like the community utility that gives them their electricity. If you think about it, there are many, many essential infrastructure needs for your community that maybe all we need to do is just expand our concept about what a vital community utility is. And I would maintain that zero waste infrastructure is essential and will never go away, because we will always have discards that need to be managed. So we have a new community utility on our hands if we approach it right. So in summary, this idea, it responds to the new set of triple bottom line rules. Like I said, landfills and incinerators don't pass the test. This does. This passes the test of the 21st century challenges. It's a perfect fit for the young entrepreneurs out there. I speak at graduate MBA schools, and you know, the energy amongst those kids is infectious. They are smart, they want to do this kind of work, and they want to make better than nonprofit salary. So we need to give them what they want. We need us, those of us over 50 that are in our careers with a little bit of influence, we need to start creating the environment so that these young 25 and 35-year-old entrepreneurs see a path forward, and we'll support them in that. The discussion today is about how to create a legally accountable DBL, double bottom line company. This will help the IRS. This conversation is going on right now. You know, if this catches your fancy, jump on in. I mean, we're having the dialogue on the internet with Scotland and other people around the world right now saying, okay guys, what's the legal vehicle for this new form of capitalism? How are we going to do this so we don't get scammed? That's a real debate going on right now. So it's a new way of doing business. We love business. We all love business. And it's just a new way of doing it. 10% profit in exchange for helping the world. Real money is real opportunity. You can get this graph off of Jeff Morris's website at zerowaste.com. How long do you think you've been in the industry when you got zerowaste.com as your website? Jeff's probably the leading recycling economist in the world. He's a good friend of mine. He's been tracking market prices. I got really active myself in the 80s there, mid-80s, about when this graph started. And that graph, it is now up to about $105. So in the last 20 years, we've gone from 33 bucks to 105. That's a 300% increase in the basket of goods of recyclables. And I just read something incredible in BioCycle magazine today in the foreword by Nora, who runs that magazine. She was just in Europe looking at the organics composting industry, and she was like, in my lifetime, there is a plant paying $10 a ton for food scraps. Food scraps now have market value in Germany. Why? Because the German government has created this thing called a feed-in tariff, where if you make biogas by through an anaerobic digester with food scraps, you can sell that gas back to the government at 24 cents a kilowatt hour. All of a sudden, food scraps is an energy source in Germany. Remember I was talking about 19-cent a gallon gasoline this morning? It's all what you want. Economics is not a hard science. And I really think that when we realize what a resource all this stuff is, we're going to start changing the rules. That's a complicated slide, but I want to give you the idea that there are 9 steps in the zero waste future. And you can become a millionaire in almost any one of those. There's not just one way. You don't have to just drive a truck. You don't have to just run a facility. There are different opportunities in the whole zero waste economy once we start picking zero as our goal and start moving forward. I think there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of money, and I think it's going to slowly grow or quickly grow. I really don't know how that's going to be. But this presentation will be available on the conference website, so you can look at this more closely then. So now, call me a socialist. Attack. I'm done. Thank you. So now we do questions, right? So we got 20 minutes to talk or so? Great. Questions?
You convinced Boulder that they need a social utility?
Boulder did something pretty amazing last fall. I don't know if you've heard. We voted as a community to municipalize, take over the electric power company. Yeah. The whole electric utility in the United States came in and fought. And we won, barely. But we are going to condemn and buy all of the electric lines and poles in our town. And we're going to, because we were working with one of the biggest electric companies in the country, Xcel out of Minnesota. And we've been talking to them for 5 years saying, we want more green electricity. They just kept messing with us. And we just called their bluff. And I don't think they thought we were really going to do it. EcoCycle, my board said I could get very involved, and I became a spokesman for the movement because I said, that's just the first thing we're taking over as the community. We're going to take over the waste stream next. And then we're going to do social enterprise contracts to the private sector. You know, we're not going to do it ourselves. I'm not in favor of governments doing this stuff. I've seen it, and it's just not, the signals are not there for government to do it efficiently. I'm sorry, any of you government workers, I didn't mean to offend you. But it's very rare that that a public employee gets fired. I've been, running companies. That's one of my greatest tools is I fire someone that doesn't produce. That never happens in the government. That's wrong. Until that changes, they shouldn't be doing this kind of business. So I really like the idea of government contracting and the privates actually running the program under like 5-year contracts or something. That way you can change or whatever. We'll see. It's a fight. It's really a fight. And I want to mention too to any of you recyclers in town who, you're in the game. You step forward when no one else would step forward. We have to be careful not to run you over. Just because the community wakes up and goes, we're going to do it, doesn't mean that we want the government industrial complex to roll over you. Your assets, you need to be preserved. You need to be lifted. You need to be given more business. But you'll only get it if you come halfway to the community and say, I'm willing to be a social enterprise. Because like I said, 10% of a big number is a big number. And if that 10% is almost guaranteed, think about it. That was the trade-off I had to make. We were a totally private company, and I had to give up the upside. And sometimes that really hurt. I made 30% profit some years. I had to give up that $5 million that got sent back to the county. But what I got in exchange, I got stability, I got support. We're in forever. We're not going to go away now because we're an integral part of the community. So there's a real trade-off to be had. Yep. So the question is what would a national bottle bill do to the national economy? Oh, to the zero waste economy. First of all, I have never been a huge fan of the bottle bill. I think that something has happened recently with Nestle. Some of you may have heard. The packaging industry is proposing to take over the packaging of America and own it. And I think that that's a step towards us, but we have to be careful. Because once they have total control over it, once again, they may not be meeting the environmental and social benefits, job creation, clean environment stuff that the community really wants to happen, okay? I like California's bottle bill, but I'm not an expert. I don't know. People tell me that's the model for the country. It's been proposed every year for 20 years and just hardly gets a hearing, right? Yeah, we've been proposing it forever. I guess from a political organizer's position, the bottle bill is so old and it has so much baggage that we should let it go and we need to evolve and we just really need to embrace a new extended producer responsibility approach that would just sort of suck the bottle bill, make it irrelevant, actually. I guess that's the way I'd approach it. There is a group called the Product Policy Institute, PPI. Go ahead and research them and see what PPI is saying about this, because Bill Sheehan runs it, and Bill's a big thinker, and he has some ideas around what should happen there. Sorry, bottle bill's always been a conundrum for me. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. So the question was this idea about new rules, changing the rules. How do we move forward in states that are really conservative? We don't. Colorado has not passed very many laws either. I mean, it's so frustrating to go to the state house. There's a world of difference between California and the rest of us, and I know that, and we all know that. It's fun to watch California just charging off and make mistakes and do their thing, and then we can learn from that. But then translating their experience back to our state legislators, you know, there's no easy answer there. I think I would go the way Gandhi said. He said, don't fight the power head on, because you're going to lose. Create an alternative institution and go around them. And so I think that's probably the best way to do it. And so I spend my time working with city councils and county councils, because I think that's how we're making progress on the Front Range of Colorado that way. We're getting some very interesting responses. 3 months ago, I met with the county commissioners in Pueblo County. As conservative as anything you got in this state, I promise you. And these guys came to my MRF a year ago, and they looked at it and they said, wow, we really want one of these. How do we get it? And I said, well, I'll come down and tell you, but only if you have an executive session and there's no private sector in the room. Because I don't want anybody in the room that's going to be impacted financially. I want to just share with you how the money flows in this industry so you understand it. Then you can go outside and meet with the haulers and the recyclers and everybody who has a stake in where it's going. We had an amazing 90-minute session with the most conservative guys I've ever met with. They got it. And they really got the jobs part, because Pueblo County is hurting for jobs. And when I told them there was 20, 25 jobs in the MRF, that right there almost sealed the deal. So now all of a sudden, they, you know, if you told them they're moving down a socialist path, I don't think they'd even see it. They'd be like, no, I'm not. I'm just doing what makes sense. You know, it's common sense to them. We'll see if they actually do anything, but it was pretty inspiring. So, yeah, state level is federal level. Got to do it local. Although I got to tell you one quick story. In 1993, myself and some others did go to Washington, and we lobbied Clinton because there was a battle going on over how much recycled content the feds were going to put into the paper purchases. Was it going to be 20% recycled content or 30%? Geeky, boring, critical, it turned out, because you can retrofit an existing paper mill to get to 20%. You have to build a new paper mill to get to 30%. And so it was a giant battle, and we won. And in 1993, Clinton said, okay, 30%. The next 18 months, we saw new paper mills built in this country. And let me show you something. In 1994, they were starting to source paper, because when you turn on a paper mill, you never turn it off 24/7, right? So you have to have a bunch of recycled paper in the yard to feed it, keep going. So all of a sudden, it was like 94, and it's like, wow, the price of paper's going up. 95 hit, and it went nuts. That's when the new paper mills opened, thanks to Clinton's decision to make 30% content. And we never, that year was crazy. Everybody was killing each other to get at paper. $250 a ton cardboard. It was just amazing. And then it collapsed, but I'll tell you, that's the year every city and every trash hauler in the United States paid attention and went, what just happened? And ever since then, we've been on a slow climb. One geeky decision by our president changed the recycling industry. This is interesting too. I'd never seen a fall so fast or a recovery so fast. It was really something, that the '08 off the cliff. Huh? Yeah, that was the recession. And the demand just stopped. China stopped buying. And I watched our domestic recycling industry slowly crumble, so that we are totally dependent on China now, and that's not a good thing. Questions? Yep. Talk to you about electronic waste. Well, you probably know everything. I mean, it's full of toxic stuff, right? You know, we know that unscrupulous people are shipping stuff to China from the US, and from Europe, they're going down to Ghana. And if you haven't seen the videos yet, you need to go watch the videos. do people know what's happening in China, how they recycle a computer? It's unbelievable. And so we're really organizing to, keep the stuff in country. You can export components to China, like a hard drive or a chip, but not the whole machine. Okay, that's the problem. So I think we're seeing a clean computer recycling or e-scrap recycling industry evolve in the United States. I think as rare earth, quote unquote rare earths, get more valuable, we're going to see that industry get even stronger, because rare earth for all of our electronic digital stuff is getting rarer. That's what is happening in Central Africa. A lot of the bloodshed there is over, minerals for our cell phones. So I think that I think it's slowly happening, and anyone who runs a free e-scrap recycling event has got to be confronted. You cannot let a free collection event happen without making them declare where it's going, because I've never seen a free recycling event where the stuff did not go to China. You just can't do it, okay? So if it's free because the government's subsidizing it, great, okay? But this free e-scrap recycling is a red flag, and somebody has to stand in front of that train and say, stop. How is it free if you're not going to China? We need to know. Otherwise, stop it. Yep. Yep. How do I feel about the producer responsibility for e-scrap? I think it's fantastic, and we've been working with the industry for years on this. They do not want to have a visible ADF, advanced disposal fee. They would rather internalize the extra cost of the EPR. I think that that's okay, but it doesn't, it sort of takes away the redesign opportunity. I'd like to reward the electronics industry for coming up with a design for recycling or design for reuse, okay? But if they're just burying the recovery cost to all of us, then nobody's going to get rewarded. So that debate is still going on. I would mention a couple of months ago, I saw my first facility in France where it's called the WEEE, W-E-E-E, Waste Electronic and Electrical Equipment. In all of Europe, anything with a power cord has to be taken back by industry at no cost. So I saw my first WEEE processing facility, where it's like all the alarm clocks and the fans, just think of the razor blades and all this stuff. And it was like, oh my God, it's huge. The jobs, the industrial processes that they're setting up to handle all of this stuff. They're getting the copper out of the cables, they're getting the plastic off the casings, they're getting the metal out of it. It works. And it's an industrial reverse manufacturing process is what they're going through. So I would love to see, that whole WEEE law created a whole new industry in Europe with full of workers and recovering those resources. And it's pretty amazing. Good question. Yeah. So 2 questions. The first is, what should we be doing to help the construction and demolition C&D industry grow? And is C&D keeping pace with MSW, municipal solid waste? So the first question is, how do we get C&D to do it? We think, and we have watched the experience here, that if a builder, okay, so you've got construction and demolition, split them in your mind. They're very different. They should have never been put together. So you got construction waste first. And it turns out that if you just required your builder to recover cardboard, metal, and plastic, you've got 50% landfill diversion right there. It's really easy. And so that's one of the new rules that government can do. It's not that tough. And what we would do is we would just have the builder put up a $2,000 bond and say, you get this back when you bring in the paperwork that you delivered the stuff to the recycling facility, okay? So I think on the construction end, if all builders have to do it, then no one's at an advantage or disadvantage. And in fact, I've seen it in Boulder, new hauling companies spring up. Who here runs a hauling company? Anybody? It's a new line of business, okay? And So also deconstruction. That's the other D you saw on my slide. I call it C, D, and D, not C and D, because I really believe that we're seeing some fantastic deconstruction. We call it the velvet crowbar businesses starting to sprout up, and we have a requirement in Boulder now that they have a deconstruction expert on retainer, so that when someone comes in and says, I want to demo this building, then the city says, first you got to hire this person, and they're going to do a report for the city to tell us what's in your building worth getting. And then that person will come in, spend a couple of hours, and give you and say, there's nothing here worth getting, knock it down. Or they'll say, you've got beautiful old oak floor back in that gymnasium. You need to go get that floor out. You got to go get this, okay? So I think the deconstruction thing is really positive, and it's new business activity. We're creating wealth out of where there was none before. C&D is separate from MSW. You correctly pointed out most people don't make that differentiation. Demolition debris is a tough one, because once it's mixed up, it's tough to sort. You got to have a huge city like Seattle or Cleveland or Toronto to make mixed D work, okay? And that's why I think deconstruction is so important. So I don't know what to say about that. I think that we're wrestling with that in Boulder right now, coming up with transfer stations where if the people who take down buildings cleanly separate wood from cement, from those things, then the government, the community will help them transport it to a market somewhere, but they have to do the work of sorting it because it's so expensive to handle mixed demolition waste. That's a tough one. Couple more questions and then it's over. I'm around the rest of the day though if you want to talk about any of this stuff. Okay, so what I'm advocating is the idea here that we're going to grow a new business sector. And it really is a new way of doing business. I think that there's this big pie of money out in the world that laissez-faire free capitalism gets to play in that playground. And there's a lot of public dollars in that playground. And I would like to see a piece of the pie pulled off called social enterprise, and our tax dollars help create a whole new way of doing business. That's the image that we're going after. Thanks.